joining us on Legacy Markets. Our theme for this week is needs versus luxuries. What investors and consumers need to know. We will explore a consumer-focused area in our economy on tonight's investment segment. The Belize Bureau of Standards, also known as BBS, is the national standards body that promotes efficiency and competitive production in goods and services. Quality infrastructure is the foundation for achieving this objective. The Bureau is responsible for protecting, securing, and safeguarding the country's welfare, a function carried out through the Consumer Protection Unit. Rhonda Tillett, Consumer Protection and Liaison Officer at the Bureau, is here today to discuss the Bureau's importance within us and explain the functioning role of the Bureau. So welcome, Ms. Tillett.
Hi, thank you for having us.
Thank you for joining us. We are so happy that you're here so we can get a clear understanding of what your branch in the Ministry of Agriculture, Food, Security, and Enterprise does. So let us start with that. What is the core of the Bureau of Standards?
So the Belize Bureau of Standards is specifically responsible for the promulgation of standards through the Standards Act, the implementation of those standards, and the revision of those standards. And we're responsible also for the Metrology Act. And that's what we're responsible for. In terms of consumer protection is not something that is a standalone thing. It is encompassed in all of those acts that we administer.
Thank you. So I know you mentioned that the Bureau is in charge of the Metrology Act. However, many of us aren't really familiar with those acts. So if you don't mind, can you please give us a synopsis of each? The Standards Act of 1992, the National Metrology Act, and the Consumer Protection Unit.
So the Standards Act gives the Bureau the responsibility to act on behalf of Belize on a national and international and regional level, participating in the development of standards. Now, a standard is a document that several agencies, people, stakeholders get together to come to a consensus on what we will agree a product, a service, a good is going to be, basically. That's a nutshell.
Okay. So what are some of the compulsory standards that we are seeing implemented by businesses, and how do you control which business complies or not? Like, let's say, labels?
Okay, specifically labels. Yes, the Belize Bureau of Standards, through the Standards Act, has implemented about 28 compulsory standards. These standards that are compulsory, they're not done in isolation, meaning that the Bureau of Standards is not the entity that decides if these standards are going to be compulsory. We do have stakeholder committees that will get together and decide whether or not, in the best interest of the Belizean populace, or national markets, or entry to international markets, whether or not these standards are going to be mandatory. And we do have a Standards Advisory Council, which advises the minister responsible for this department on the need for passage of these standards or a standard as compulsory. And if we're talking specifically about labeling is one of those standards that is particularly necessary for the protection of consumers, consumer protection, and for those businesses that are producing these goods, products, or services. A label protects a consumer in a way where you know, based on information that is provided and based on what the standard decides is going to be outlined on that product, it gives that consumer information that would be necessary for them to make an informed decision.
Absolutely. And in terms of consumer protection, we are aware that there is a consumer protection unit, and we understand that there is no comprehensive legislation under the unit. With that said, how can you enforce the mission of your unit if there is no legislation to back you up?
Okay, so that's one of those misconceptions that we are very happy to clear up. Consumer protection does not necessarily need a particular act in order for consumers to be protected, because the legislations that the substantive legislations of Belize acts as tools for consumer protection. For example, the Standards Act that aids in consumer protection by passing these compulsory standards. And it also aids in consumer protection, not just by the compulsory standard, but by those voluntary standards that are developed. Now, the reason for developing any standard is so that we have consistency in the production of any good, so that the consumer labeling is properly informed on how these products, goods, and services are made, and for access to international markets specifically.
Well, thank you so much, Ms. Rhonda, for that insight. We do need to take a short break, but when we come back, I want us to talk about the consumer rights, so don't go away.